as with all of our viewers who are watching this event online from home. I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. There is some cold water on either side here. If you need to get some of that, feel free to jump up and grab some. As President and CEO of the Denver Rescue Mission, I'd be the first to admit that this past year has been challenging for all of us at the mission. But through the trials and tribulations that the pandemic brought, our staff, our volunteers, our board, and our God loved more, cared more, and changed lives more in the past year, really the past 18 months, than ever before. Author Bob Goff said, "People don't grow where they are planted, they grow where they are loved." This couldn't be more true when it comes to describing the mission's efforts in helping our neighbors experiencing homelessness during the past 129 years that the mission has been serving this community. This love didn't stop during COVID-19. And to all of you, our supporters, thank you for all the ways you have come alongside the mission and for your continued and loyal support. We could not do this work without you. We know that, and we appreciate it. I want to acknowledge just a few groups in particular that are with us tonight. First, we have several members of our board of directors in the room, and I'd like to invite them to just stand for a moment, and we just like to thank them for their leadership, wherever they are. It is an honor to work alongside of you, and we appreciate you. Secondly, those with the burgundy ribbons on their name tags are part of our Good Heart Society legacy, giving community, legacy community, meaning that they have designated the mission in their estate plans. Thank you for your dedication to the mission in this way. And lastly, we have leadership members in attendance from our Denver Rescue Mission Young Professionals Group. These are a group of people of more than 300 members of the next generation of mission supporters. Thank you so much for your commitment to our Young Professionals Group. Moving to our program tonight, I have the honor of welcoming to the stage 4 people who not only rose to the occasion to help those experiencing homelessness, but continually dive straight into the fire to love our neighbors experiencing homelessness. I'm just going to take a moment and introduce them. First, we have the unstoppable Tracy Brooks, who is our newly appointed Vice President of Emergency Services at Denver Rescue Mission. Tracy has been, go ahead, let's give her a hand. Sorry, I was cutting off the applause. I didn't mean to do that. I have more to say about you, though. She's been with the mission for more than 6 years. Prior to that, she was with the Salvation Army. She oversees all of our frontline services and manages more than 120 staff members. Tracy has a wealth of knowledge in the human service field. Right next to her, we have the fearless Deb Butte. Deb is our Director of Homeless Resolution at the mission and oversees a team of 46 staff members in the areas of intake, case management, resource navigation, and shelter diversion for our guests. Deb's efforts have created life-changing results in serving our guests and were instrumental in making sure our guests were taken care of during the pandemic. Let's welcome her. Our next panelist is Josh Capelt, who is our courageous Vice President of Programs. You have to have a lot of courage to be in charge of programs at the Denver Rescue Mission. So he has faithfully served at the mission for the past 15 years. The mission's emergency services, as well as long-term rehabilitation and transitional programs, are under him. Josh is a mayoral appointee on the Department of Homeless Resolution Strategic Advisors Commission. Just to be on that, that's such a long title. I mean, it just shows the importance of that particular thing. So he's helping to define the city's strategic focus within housing and homelessness. Josh and Tracy work closely with the city and numerous other service providers to develop collaborative solutions for those experiencing homelessness in our community. Let's give Josh a hand. And speaking of the city, we have a very special guest with us tonight. Last but not least, the panelist we're introducing is the resilient Angie Nelson. Angie is with the city's Department of Housing Stability, also known as HOST, and that's capital H-O-S-T. Her title is Deputy Director of Housing Stability and Homelessness Resolution. Again, a very important title, Angie. Before then, Angie worked in policy and programs to address homelessness with Denver Human Services, Denver's Road Home, and HOST for 7 years. Prior to working with the city, she developed and led transitional housing programs for the Denver Rescue Mission and Warren Village. Let's give her a hand. This evening's program focuses on how the mission and the city of Denver are working together in innovative ways amidst an ever-changing environment in the last 18 months to better serve those experiencing homelessness. Contained in the discussion tonight are many of the pressing topics we get most asked about by our supporters like you. We're excited to bring you this discussion from our expert panel, so let's dive right in. I'm going to ask a series of questions of our panelists, and they're going to answer those. If something comes up, you're hearing Deb or Tracy or any of our panelists talking about something, please just make a mental note of that or type it in your phone, and we will have at the very end of this question and answer period. So I would ask you to just hold on to your questions, and I'm going to do my best to kind of guide us through this and ask them some questions. So we're going to start with Tracy. Here we go, Tracy. Okay. You're on the clock.
All right.
There were a lot of changes made at the mission following COVID-19. This includes opening the 48th Avenue Center alongside the city of Denver. Can you share more about this shelter?
So I feel like during COVID, me and my team were nomads, and we moved from National Western to Coliseum to 4330 48th Avenue. And in June, we moved into our new facility. It's a building owned by the city of Denver, and we lease it for $10 a year and run it as a shelter for men. And it holds 470 individuals. It's made up of 3 dorms, and it helped us transition to 24/7 shelter. So prior to this, we had only done overnight sheltering. We would have individuals downtown. We would bus them to overnight shelters and bus them back. And a lot of times our individuals only got about 6 to 8 hours of sleep. With 24-hour sheltering, they're getting adequate sleep, and we're able to meet their needs. But one of my favorite things is that we were able to also bring case management in-house for them. And so instead of trying to find resources throughout the city and traveling from place to place, they're able to access our case management and peer navigator teams in the facility. And because they're not worried about where they're going to sleep at night, they are more interested in connecting with those case managers, and we've had 86% of them connect with the case managers while they're at 48.
Great. Tracy, thank you. Speaking of the increase in staff, which Tracy spoke a little bit about, Josh, could you briefly describe some of the overall organizational changes we saw because of COVID-19?
Certainly. As was mentioned, can you hear me?
Try it again, Josh.
Hello, hello, hello.
Keep testing.
Hello, hello.
There you go.
Hello?
Okay.
Maybe. Going once, going twice. So, as was mentioned, in the midst of COVID, we not only expanded the hours that we were operating shelter, but we also moved to do a lot more quality work within shelters. And so that resulted in a drastic increase in our need for staffing. And so I think pre-COVID, emergency services staff was about 40, as was mentioned earlier. We're up to 120 now. And I think, again, that speaks to the breadth of things that we're trying to accomplish within those environments. As was mentioned, when we moved into the current 48th Avenue facility back in June, that's a 80+ thousand square foot facility. And so just the sheer amount of space that we need to oversee now 24/7 requires a whole lot of staff just to be on the floor so that we can be responsive to needs as they arise. We can assist guests as they just try to move throughout the facility. And then most importantly, we have the capacity to work with guests to determine what's their exit pathway out of shelter. More and more, our heart is becoming that we want a safe place for people to be when there's no place for them to be. But more importantly, we want that safe place to be a launching point into permanent housing, into whatever is the next step to get them moving towards permanent housing. And so lots of staff added. And I say staff added because we have lots of positions that have been funded, and we have way too many of those positions that aren't even full yet. If you are working in the business world at all, if you watch the news, or maybe if you're breathing, you realize that there's a staffing sort of shortage going on right now. And so that impacts us as well. So I'll take 10 seconds to make a plug. If you know anyone who has a heart for people experiencing homelessness that would like to work in an emergency shelter, they can get on our website because we have jobs that we're looking to fill. There's a great need. In addition to that growth, we restructured our entire staff team that oversees all the work that we do within emergency services. As was mentioned earlier, we created a new role on our lead team, and we put Tracy in that role, which was not only the most obvious decision that we could make, but was probably the best decision that we made this year, and then restructured the entire team that works with and for her. Our Lawrence Street shelter downtown, which if you know the mission, that's where we have the Big Jesus Save sign. We've had some presence at that facility since 1971. We had a construction project planned for that facility pre-pandemic that was intended to convert that 113-year-old building to be ADA accessible. It's a 3-story building. If you've ever been in it, if you ever used to serve meals in the old basement of that building, it had horrible stairs. And so for our guests that we served that had any issue, trying to move throughout life, they used a walker, they used a cane, they were in a wheelchair, that building was horrendous for them. And so that project was actually done amidst the pandemic. And in addition to the ADA upgrades, we actually converted what was that underground old floor with a kitchen that we used to have the kitchen in into a new dorm. And so it didn't increase the capacity of that facility, but it decompressed and it allowed more space per person, as again we seek to increase the quality of experience for folks that are staying in our shelters. And so that's a short list of things. There's lots of other things that have happened this last year in the midst of our response to just everything going on.
Yeah. Thanks, Josh. I would just echo what Josh said about looking for more staff. In November of 2019, we had approximately 225 staff. We have 300 staff now, and our goal is to get to 360 to be able to cover all of these 24/7 shelters that we're doing. I mean, it's chefs, custodians, what we call emergency service coordinators inside. So we're looking for all those folks. The opening of 48th Avenue Center was made possible through our partnership with the City of Denver, Department of Housing Stability. Angie, can you speak to the role of partnerships with organizations like the Mission for serving those experiencing homelessness?
Yeah, I think as the Department of Housing Stability, our model is really one of service delivery through partnership. So the city, while we do, lots of direct services in our human services division or, some of our other really client-facing departments, the Department of Housing Stability relies on the partnerships of organizations like Denver Rescue Mission, Catholic Charities, Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, all of these great community partners that have been present and doing this important work for years and years and years. We really rely on those folks to be our strong partners in this work. And just like Josh was saying, making sure that our emergency solutions, our emergency homeless crisis response is not just a safe place to be at night, but a launching pad to a safe, stable pathway out of homelessness and into housing stability. COVID, like for everyone else, really changed the landscape for a person experiencing homelessness in our city. So pretty immediately in March of 2020, due to concerns around congestion of space within shelters and too close of quarters and uncertainty about, what was safe for folks, our shelter capacity reduced by about 54%. So that we could enact more social distancing and allowing for folks to have, at least 6 feet apart in their sleeping space and in their day shelter space. And that was a significant reduction. And it really took partners like Denver Rescue Mission, like Catholic Charities and VOA and Gathering Place and Bayard, who stood up and said, okay, we're maxed out in what our facilities can do, but we're here to help. What can we do? We even called the National Guard in to help staff when we stood up the Coliseum, when we stood up the National Western Center to try and serve as additional auxiliary shelter sites, not just providing, a cot or a mat, but a 24/7 shelter experience that can connect folks on the ground with case management and services to help them hopefully resolve their episode of homelessness. And through the partnerships that we created and were able to fund with the help of FEMA dollars and lots of different resources coming together, we saw actually a 65% increase in shelter utilization during the past 18 months. So from January before COVID started until January of 2021, 65% more people were sleeping in our shelters overnight, even with the reductions we had. So it's pretty remarkable the way our community partners were able to come together to meet those needs. I think that the partnerships that we formed kind of in the trenches of those auxiliary shelters like for National Western and Coliseum really set the stage as well for what's happening now at the 48th Center and the collaborations happening on the ground with Coalition for the Homeless having integrated medical services on site. Like those types of partnerships weren't unheard of, but they weren't nearly as common before COVID. And I really think it's in great part, honestly, Brad, your leadership and Josh's leadership and the great leadership of Josh and Tracy and your team always being at the table and standing up and raising your hand and saying, how can we help? What can we do? How do we make this better for the person experiencing homelessness? And I think as the city, we've just been blown away by that partnership of the mission, but all of our nonprofit partners as well.
Good. Thank you, Angie. Angie mentioned the increase that has taken place in the city of those seeking shelter services, 65%, pretty incredible number. Deb, would you tell us what someone experiences when they first come to the mission and they are new to our facility?
Sure. I just want to start with saying I'm looking around this room and thinking you guys allow me to do what I get to do. And I love getting to do what I get to do. You're coming tonight to hear about homelessness. The blessing that I get is I get to work with individuals and know people by their name and what is going on with them. And that's really what we do when people show up at the door at Denver Rescue Mission. We welcome them in, and we really go through 4 things with each person that enters our door. And one is just giving them a safe space to say, hey, we know you've come out of something that has led you here. You're not coming here because it's a visit to the zoo or a stay at the Marriott, right? You're coming here because something very traumatic has happened in your life and you're in crisis. And we want to provide a safe space to help you navigate this time in your life. Secondly, we gather some information from them so that we can know a little bit about where they came from and are they sure they can't go back? because we know that the shelter can be a very, very difficult place for people. And so we want to help them think through those solutions of, do you really have to use shelter? I have listened to lots of different things about how to work with our people, and a great example that we really want to try to do at Denver Rescue Mission is, if someone comes to your front door, you have a very different conversation with them than if they enter into your foyer, right? And then you have a very different conversation with them there than when you have them sit down in your family room. And you have a very different conversation there than before you put them in one of your guest bedrooms, right? And so we want to have that conversation of, are you sure you need to be using shelter? Where did you come from? Are you sure you can't go back there? Or are there other solutions of things that you could do besides seeking shelter? Then third, we ask some information just about who they are so that we know who is in our shelters. Our programming is going to look very different if we're working with a lot of 60-year-old vets than if we're working with all 25-year-old men, right? And so gathering that information so that we can provide services well. And then sharing with them how shelter works. There's a de-escalation that comes within a person emotionally when they know what they can expect. When are they going to get food? When are their clothes going to get washed? How are they going to get a shower? And giving them that information so that they're not just following a crowd and feeling insecure about their setting, but they have some information about how this works. And then before we let them go, we talk to them about how do you get connected so that you can get out? How do we not communicate that shelter is housing, but how do we get you connected immediately with services so that you can start thinking about how to not get stuck here? And then we have peer navigators that are people with lived experience that we can hand them off to and say, hey, here's someone who gets it and understands the difficulty of really where you've been and what you're going through. And they have been able to exit homelessness into stable housing solutions. And so really getting them to talk to them about how to get connected with our case managers and really start on day one thinking about how to move forward.
One of the great benefits that has come out of this COVID-19 has been the implementation of the 24/7 shelters. And do you want to elaborate at all, Deb, about that benefit?
Sure. So I was a big skeptic, and I don't know how many people are sitting in this room thinking 24/7 shelter. That was, probably my thought a year and a half ago of, do we want to provide that? And I will say I have changed my mind for these reasons. I think for some it can be a slippery slope. For most, what we're seeing is that we are not duplicating work with all the other service providers in the city because we can find people. When a client comes to us and starts working on case management, the person is not away from us most of the day. They tend to be in our setting. And so we can reach out. We're doing a really good job of collaborating with other organizations of who's working with who in the community, and then saying, hey, how about you get this part and we'll take this part. And we can then find the person at their bed location where their locker is and say, hey, we need you to sign this paperwork so that we're not losing time and moving things forward. There's so much time lost in starting over and over and over on step one with a client because we can't find them. And we're finding since their basic needs are met, they're more willing to engage. Seeing a case manager is no longer a programmatic barrier. It's a part of the shelter. They can walk up to the counter and say, hey, I'd like to see a case manager today. So it's a much easier task to engage the client. The other thing is our peer navigators are going into our shelters and actually seeking out certain demographics. So Tracy, we all attend a lot of meetings of kind of what is the movement of resources for what demographics to be able to move towards stabilization. And we can then say, oh, there's a push towards this group, and we can go into the shelters and have our peer navigators really engage that group so that we're working with them. And then I just, there's a lot of work that is done in this new environment of clients can't move around to see people in person. And the great thing about what has happened in this last year and having a 24-hour resource is that a lot of our appointments are online now. So for our clients who can't navigate a bus system, it's expensive to navigate the bus system, we have a lot of our providers now seeing our clients in an online platform where they can literally move from their bed to 40 steps down the hall and meet with a Social Security attorney, meet with child support, meet with Denver Human Services. And again, we're not going to look for people to make sure that they make these appointments. They're right there.
Good. Deb, thank you. I appreciate it. Knowing that the physical health of our guests can be a barrier to them to become self-sufficient, Tracy, can you talk about how we work directly with our guests to overcome these challenges?
So as Deb mentioned, as people come in the front door, we sit down with them and find out what barriers would have brought them to our door. And so as part of that, we're talking about their physical health, their mental health, and what supports they need to exit homelessness. I think one of the things that was a great discovery when we were in National Western is we worked with Coalition for the Homeless, and they brought their Stout Street clinic on site. And so our guests could walk, from their bed to the clinic if they had health issues, and it was busy all day. And so we're excited as we move into the new shelter at 48th that Stout Street will be joining us there as well. And the women's shelter is just across the railroad tracks, and the females will have access to that health care as well. So we're excited about that partnership. One of the great barriers that a number of our individuals with physical and mental health needs is getting Social Security disability income. And you can't get it without having the diagnosis from a doctor, and not an emergency room, but a doctor that you've seen regularly. And so without having that, they can't get that Social Security income to be able to move into housing. And so we want to connect them with those medical services. We're also excited. We are collaborating with Denver Health for a telemedicine portal where individuals at our Lawrence Street Community Center, if they're having mental health needs, barriers, questions, they can go and log on to that mental health portal and ask questions and get help immediately from that kiosk. We've also been partnering with our Department of Health through COVID. And so they've been a great partner to us. They've come in, they're testing regularly at all of our shelters and providing vaccinations to our staff and to our guests for flu, for hepatitis, for COVID. So they've been a great partner to us in helping us design the shelters and meet the needs of our guests.
Good. Tracy, thank you. Angie, during COVID-19, there was a great need to create more space for individuals experiencing homelessness. We've just been talking about that. One response has been the safe outdoor spaces. Can you tell us a little bit about safe outdoor spaces?
Yeah. So we know that housing is the solution to homelessness. We know this. And we know that indoor solutions that serve people with a roof over their head and indoor plumbing and things are really the best option to stabilize people, and they're the best for human health. So I want to be clear about that for starting, that we're big proponents of indoor services and housing. At the same time, especially during COVID, we've seen an increase of folks experiencing unsheltered homelessness who, for whatever reason, aren't making their way to the open beds that we have available at places like the Mission and our other shelters to serve folks. And so partnering with the Colorado Village Collaborative, the city worked to pilot a safe outdoor space program, and we're now on our second and third sites throughout the community. But this is really an opportunity to try and meet people where they're at. Whatever barriers are making it tough for them to seek shelter in a congregate setting, we want to break those down and provide a place where they can camp in a way that reduces the harm of those unauthorized encampment settings that can otherwise be pretty unsafe and pretty unhealthy with a lot of the conditions. And so we're really grateful for partners who've been willing to step in and try something new, to meet people where they're at, and for us to try and engage them towards services that get them off of the street. And so we know, while safe outdoor space in and of itself is not a solution, the city is always looking for ways to diversify our options, to try and get more folks inside, get more folks to services and the help they need to hopefully resolve their episode of homelessness and become stably housed again. And we really think safe outdoor spaces are one of those ways to reduce harm and meet folks where they're at, get them connected.
Good. Thank you, Angie. Shifting gears to the eviction moratorium, Tracy, what is the mission doing to prepare for a potential increase of people utilizing our services when this eviction moratorium is lifted?
Sure. So one of the things we have really been working towards is what Deb talked about, which is a single point of entry into our services. I often think if I was homeless, I'm not sure that I would know exactly where to go in Arvada to get services if I needed them. And so having a single point of entry, one place that people can be directed to when they find themselves homeless, I think is important. It's easy to access. And once they get into that door and they meet with our team, we're really looking at what are you already holding. And for individuals that have been housed, most of them have had jobs, they've had apartments. So we again want to turn that around quickly. So at our Lawrence Street shelter downtown, the Jesus Saves building, we have converted that to really working with men that are working and for individuals that are new to homelessness. Because going into a large shelter like 48 can be a little bit intimidating if you've never been homeless before. And so that is a little bit quieter, a little bit smaller, and we have case managers there ready to talk to them and work with them. So for individuals who are experiencing eviction, this is often a new experience. We want to meet with them, assess where they're at, give them hope, and help them take those steps to move on.
Great. Thank you, Tracy. Josh, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the transitional and rehabilitation programs offered at the mission for families and individuals facing evictions.
Sure. We've heard a whole lot about what we do organizationally and as a community to move people from an experience of homelessness towards housing, and most importantly, towards housing that is stable. And so all of our programs are geared towards helping individuals or families move towards the right type of housing solution for them, and to ensure that once they're placed into housing, that they have a higher degree of success long-term in that housing. And so we do a lot of work. We would call them like skill development. I mean, things that, depending upon how you were raised, you may not think twice about, but the importance of paying your bills on time, the importance of that it's helpful to be a good tenant if you want to, have your lease renewed. And so we have 3 or 4 different programs that we run. Again, they're all housing focused, but have different amounts of intervention as we seek to work with individuals and families that are moving towards housing. And so Family Rescue Ministries is a program that we've run for 25 years, which is geared towards working with folks that for the most part have had a very short experience of homelessness. A life event has happened that has resulted in their homelessness, but they have sort of all the things in place to get rehoused quickly, and they have a lot of skill sets that would help to support their housing long term. And so we work with them to try to locate housing. We can help them overcome the insane costs now to move into housing. What used to be, when I was first getting out of college, it's like, oh, you need to kind of have first month's rent. Well, we see now it's, a deposit, first month's rent, last month's rent, and just the huge cost to get into housing up front. We help with that. And then most importantly, we match those families or individuals with mentoring teams to support them as they transition back into housing for up to 6 months, really as a way to acknowledge the fact that, most of people in life have folks to call when things aren't going well. And for a lot of the folks that we work with, they don't have those relational connections in our community. And so it just is to provide a connection that they have someone to call, when life doesn't work out as planned. Again, the idea being that when those bumps come, the end result is not homelessness again, that there's more stability. And we've seen those relationships be the key to keep both individuals and families housed long term. Our STAR Transitional Program is a residential program that we host at the Crossing, and this is for individuals that have income coming in. For most people, this is earned income. They have employment. For some folks that are older, they may have Social Security income coming in. They may have a retirement income, things like that. But oftentimes, whose income does not necessarily translate to the cost of housing. And so we work a lot with them to understand what affordable housing options they might qualify for, as well as what opportunities that there might be for them to increase their income in order to sort of move more towards traditional housing opportunities. Because unfortunately, in our community, there's not nearly enough housing that's affordable to go around. And so a lot of work there is really to help people move through the system of rehousing and to ensure that we can expedite that process for them. And then the New Life program, which we talk a lot about at the Rescue Mission, is really geared towards adult men who primarily have an addiction history. And so that's our deepest dive of the work that we do with individuals that are experiencing homelessness, as we acknowledge that if you have an addiction, that is a severe and persistent illness that is not a quick solution. And so we do a lot of work there to stabilize individuals amidst their addiction. We do a lot of work around relapse prevention. And we try to acknowledge with folks that the journey towards recovery is usually filled with multiple episodes of relapse. And so we don't try to convince people that to be in recovery means that you are relapse proof. What we want to do is teach skills that suggest, hey, if relapse happens, or probably more accurately, when relapse happens, how can we develop skills so that the choices that are made don't result in homelessness again? I talk a lot about how I know plenty of people who are functioning addicts whose addiction has not led to homelessness. And while I certainly wouldn't wish that on anybody, it's way better if we can keep people housed in the midst of their journey through recovery than for the first time that they relapse, that they're on the streets again and in shelter and their life has crashed around them. So those are three kind of unique tiers that we have as we really try to work closely with individuals that are experiencing homelessness.
Josh, just as a follow-up question, we know there will likely be Afghan families settling in the Denver area and needing our support. Can you tell us about services available at the mission for refugee families?
Yes, we've already had Afghan families that have arrived in Denver, I think as early as like 10 days ago. And so we at the Rescue Mission view our work with refugee families that are being placed in our community as an attempt at homelessness prevention. So we are not a resettlement agency, which means we don't work with the feds to determine who's coming to Denver. There's a whole system for that. We partner with those agencies that are tasked to receive those families and to rehouse them, really with an eye of how do we increase the likelihood that those individuals who are coming from a horrendous background, lots of trauma, and on top of that are trying to figure out how to do life in a completely different culture, how do we help stabilize them in a way that when their 6 months of assistance from the feds runs out, that they don't end up homeless. And so much like our rehousing program that we do for seniors and families, we do a lot of financial assistance to try to extend sort of the amount of time that they have to get employment and things like that. And then again, we match them with teams of mentors to come alongside them, really with the eye towards how do we help them get used to life in America. I mean, things like having to navigate public transportation, getting children enrolled for school, trying to figure out how to get like translation services, how to get a driver's license. I mean, there's all these systems that, I can only imagine if I moved to Afghanistan, how difficult it would be for me to figure out how to do very normal tasks in a very foreign country. And so that's really our work, is to create opportunities to help expedite how quickly we can get those individuals stabilize so that they don't become homeless. We work really closely with Lutheran Family Services, that is one of those agencies that is tasked to resettle refugees, and they estimate probably in the next 6 to 9 months we'll probably have somewhere between 8 and 1,200 Afghan families resettled in the Denver metropolitan area. And so their efforts expand all the way down to the Springs and up to Fort Collins. So, you know, when they say metro, they really mean Front Range. But there's lots of opportunity. And again, through our lens, it's homelessness prevention. Because if we don't do this work, then we have these individuals who are further traumatized because they're trying to figure out how to do life in America on the streets. So lots of opportunity there in the next handful of months.
Yeah, and we are right now looking for folks to be a part of that program. And if you're interested at all in really groups of between 2 to 6 people that could be more that might come alongside of refugee families or just poor families through the Family Rescue Ministry, you know, you can contact us and we would be interested in visiting with you about that. Deb, your team has really come alongside of people from all walks of life and adapted amidst so many uncertainties. Can you speak to our frontline staff's efforts this past year, as well as perhaps share a success story that you've witnessed this year?
Sure. I don't know how many of you are here tonight thinking, oh, it's so good to be out and around people. And I will tell you, we do not feel like that. We have been around people, around a lot of people. And even just, you know, thinking about Josh talking about, you know, trying to get refugees connected to mentors, Brad asking for that. What we found a year ago, March, when you all were pulled out of the city, was who was left? Who was left was our people. And they had nowhere to go. So think about just if some of the kind of foundational things in your life, if the bottom fell out, the amount of safety nets that you would fall through before you ended up in that situation. These were people that had nowhere to go. And so that's really what we experienced. Our frontline staff, when everyone else was saying work from home and, you know, shelter in place, our staff was showing up thinking, will we have masks today? I've heard this mask thing is supposed to help, is what, you know, the feel was in March. And nobody cough, because if you cough, you know, you might be really endangering somebody. I mean, it was like a movie. And the thing that we realized is that this is not a funny movie. This is a really scary movie for people. And thankfully, we had staff that showed up and said, we'll do it. We don't know exactly what this will look like. We're going to put in long hours, and we're going to maybe risk getting this, and we'll see what this looks like. And so it was, in a lot of ways, a very unifying thing for our staff, but also, I think, made us realize the weight of this work, that this was not only an emergency, this was really life and death for people. And when people had nowhere else to go, we were the place for them to go. So as far as a story, you know, I think at that time we moved into 24/7 shelter so that we weren't having to put people on buses. And that is where there was just kind of a lot of cohesion built between our emergency services staff, who's really there in the day-to-day, day in, day out with our people, knowing, you know, what the people's immediate needs are, and being able to have that quick conversation with the case managers of, I'm seeing this guy all day, he's not doing very well. And having the case managers and the peer navigators then being able to say, we're on it, and outreaching the person in the bed and finding out, okay, what does this person need? We'll pull up a chair next to their cot at the National Western, and we'll talk about, you know, what does the person need? And the person I'm specifically thinking of is, they were a 50-year-old gentleman that appeared to have some pretty significant medical needs. And so just starting that process of, let's look into how do we get him a Social Security disability. But Social Security's closed. So how do we do that? How do we reach out to our contacts that are now at home and our Social Security contacts saying, hey, we're not in the office, but let's figure out how we can do this online. And the IT department going, we're on it. We'll figure out how to do this online. And then talking to the client and doing the hard work of finding out where else have they been and who else have they been in touch with. And this client had a background of working with Mental Health Centers of Denver. And Mental Health Centers of Denver were willing to work with us with this client and come into our shelters and talk to them about what housing options do they have. And so all of that work of all the different teams saying, how do we make sure that even in the midst of this crisis, we still have people moving forward?
Good. We have time for just a couple more questions. So Angie, I'm going to go to you. As we continue to move forward from the pandemic, how is Host planning some of the next steps for responding to the needs of those experiencing homelessness?
Yeah, you all may not know, but the Department of Housing Stability is not quite 2 years old. So we were founded, Mayor Hancock signed an executive order to stand up this new city department in October of 2019. And so we've really cut our teeth as an agency in pandemic response. And so alongside all of our focus on sort of this rescue effort of making sure that people have a safe place to be and kind of quarterbacking the city's homelessness response throughout the pandemic, we've also been engaging in a lengthy strategic planning process, trying to make sure that as we've aligned these different city resources to try and cover the entire continuum of housing affordability services, so either helping folks to stay stably housed in the homes that they're in, quickly resolving episodes of homelessness, or creating opportunities for safe, affordable, stable housing through the development of affordable housing and affordable homeownership. That while we brought together the right people and the right services to set up this new department, that we could also be very strategic in that and make sure that we were being accountable to the taxpayers of the city of Denver and to the people who are entrusting us, their city, to do right by our community members who are most vulnerable and most in need of our help. And so we've been engaged in a strategic planning process. As Brad mentioned, Josh is part of our Housing Stability Strategic Advisors Group, which is a mayoral appointed group where he's really been central in giving that provider perspective, as well as just the sort of well-rounded experience throughout homeless services to make sure that what we're doing is ringing true to the needs expressed in the community. Brad's been part of our executive committee for the strategic planning process. And we're super grateful. Just last Friday, we wrapped up our community survey period for our strategic plan draft. And next month, it'll be going before City Council for their approval. And so we have 14 overarching goals, which is an improvement. If any of you remember Denver's Road Home Days and the 10-year plan to end homelessness, we had about 10 goal areas with about 87 strategies. So this is an improvement of something we feel like we can deliver on and show accountability towards and progress towards. In my area of responsibility in housing stability and in homelessness resolution, we're really looking to help continue the transformation of our shelter system towards a rehousing system. We're looking to reduce experiences of unsheltered homelessness in our community by half or more, so that the experience of homelessness is really something that's rare, and when it happens, it's brief, and it only happens once. We want people to have choice in when and under what circumstances they move from their communities, and we want people to have opportunities to access housing that meets their affordability needs. And so please stay tuned for the release of our strategic plan. It's kind of in its final refinement steps right now, but we're really excited as we are still in rescue. We're not over the pandemic, right? It's very real still, and it's very real for folks in congregate settings and experiencing homelessness. But as we start to pivot towards recovery, we are fortunate to have federal resources, American Rescue Plan dollars, all kinds of new resources that we didn't have prior to the pandemic, and a unique opportunity to connect more people to housing than ever before. And so we're just as excited as an exhausted group can be, which I think rings true
Good.
for all of you as well.
So, thanks, Angie. Hey, we're going to open it up to questions. Before we do that, I would be remiss if I didn't say this to you. Our mission statement says we are changing lives in the name of Christ. If I didn't say the name of Jesus, it would be wrong, because we are only here because of the person of Jesus Christ. We're changing lives in the name of Jesus, of Christ. We know that He's the one that's really changing lives. We're just the vessels for that. And our goal is to meet people at their spiritual and physical points of need and help them become productive, self-sufficient citizens. That's really what we do at the Denver Rescue Mission, and God has allowed us to have a great partner in the city, as represented by Angie here, and in this community as well. So, hey, let's open it to some questions. Does anyone have a question they'd like to ask? Yes, ma'am. Oh, wait, we're going to run a microphone over to you, so we'll be sure and hear it. Come on, Blake. Good job.
I have a question.
Oh, we're going to try it again. Go ahead.
Hello? Okay, I have a question for Deb. You are asked to give a success story. You're talking about the 50-year-old man with the medical problems, but you never told us what happened with him. Do you know where he is now?
Yeah. So we were able to find out where else he had been connected. We got him reconnected with MHCD, who has access to housing, and we're able to bridge that connection between us back to them, and they were able to house this gentleman. Yeah.
Good. So a good
Thanks
ending.
for following up. I didn't finish. Yeah. Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, sir. I'm going to try to hear you. Go ahead. Alexa's coming as fast as she can.
Yeah. Hello?
Hello.
I don't know if this is unorthodox or what, but I think of it because of my situation. I'm married, but my wife, she lives in Golden. She's got her life, and I live in Thornton. And I was wondering, is it possible to have any type of a program where a resident out there in the community would have an available room that could be opened up for a qualified person to transition out of yours, rent-free for a certain amount of time?
Yeah.
Yes.
So, Deb, are you aware of any program like that? Or Josh?
It just so happens that there's an individual here this evening that runs an organization called Open Up that does exactly what you're talking about, that seeks to connect individuals that could use more affordable housing with folks that have homes and empty bedrooms. His name is Andy. He's standing right back there, and he's currently waving his hand. So he would love to talk to you and answer that question. But what I appreciate is the question that you're asking is, how creative are we being as a community as we think about what housing solutions look like? And that's one thing I really respect about the work that is being done in our community, that Angie and her team is doing, is they're not just looking to think about traditional aspects of housing, that the only way to rehouse someone is their own private unit. We're looking at shared housing. We're looking at opportunities for smaller units, and so we really are trying to be creative and rethink how we define housing. And so what you're describing is a way that is becoming more and more needed in our community because it's so darn expensive to live here. So, yep.
Tracy, go ahead.
I think one of the interesting things, like at our Lawrence Street shelter, with individuals that are working, is housing is expensive and they're finding roommates. So they're living with these guys in the congregate shelter, and they find roommates, and pretty soon we see 2 or 3 of them moving out to rent an apartment, a townhome, and that type of thing, and they're able to address things that way.
And then, Nicole, do we have a virtual question?
Yes, we have a handful of virtual questions. The first one is for Deb or Tracy. This individual loved the success story, so they would love to hear another one of a guest we've served in the past year that really stood out to you and made an impact for you as a frontline staffer.
Okay, I have a.
Can I
yeah.
start this by saying, Deb is the real thing. And so I saw her in the middle of the riots in downtown Denver chasing after an individual to do a signature so he could move into housing. And she's going to tell you the story about someone that we've worked with who's been homeless for several years. But Deb went out to the homeless encampments searching for him by herself, without my knowledge, to get signatures.
Yeah, this is a gentleman who has been homeless for over a decade, and we'll just say he was a little more of a difficult client in our setting, and started working with him and just gave him a very realistic picture of getting Social Security and getting into housing likely takes people 2 or 3 years, and that is staying engaged, answering your mail, following up with a case manager to sign paperwork. This is no just go talk to someone and you're moved in 2 months later. People have to stay engaged for 2 or 3 years. This is a guy that the narrative in the city was, oh yeah, we know him, he's been around for years, he doesn't want to engage, he doesn't want to be housed. Well, after meeting with him a couple of times, I actually learned under his breath that he couldn't read. So every time he went to meet with someone and they would put paperwork in front of him and say, fill this out, and he would say no, they read that as he doesn't want housing, he's just one of those people that wants to be homeless. And come to find out, he was embarrassed for over a decade to tell anyone that he was illiterate. And so started working on this is a client where you can't just send to the doctor, because what do you do when you go to the doctor? You sit down with the clipboard and you fill out the paperwork. And so this client is going to take a lot of hand-holding. Long story short, his name came up on a housing list, and we thought this was the thing. We were going to get to move him in, and we went to what I thought was the lease up. And as we're kind of finishing some things, the property manager says, "Oh, we forgot to do a background check, and your felony is not quite 7 years old. If you have a felony record, it's going to be really hard for you to get into housing within 5 to 7 years of that." And so his felony record, the felony that he was charged for, was about 6.5 years old. And so I just begged, can we just keep him on the top of the list so that in 6 months we can, come back to you? And they said, no, his name's going to fall back to the bottom of the list. So he left there very discouraged, like, you are running me along this path, and I am, I'm out. I don't know if this is all worth it. I've been doing this with you for 2 years. And so there's something that is done in the city and done nationally called One Home. His name did come up on another housing list, on the One Home list, about 8 months later. And we tried to engage him again of, hey, will you work with me? I think this is the real one. And without just going on and on with all the fun details, but I've got some fun stories. He was able to move into housing. And the day we moved him in, I took him out to breakfast, and he said, I want to know how much you can eat, because you look like you can pack it away. And I thought, well, but this is what I love about the population. You hear what they really think. But when I went to leave his apartment that day, he said to me, had never said this to me before, could you come by sometime and take me to church? And he had never thought of that before, because he had been so engaged in just trying to do the basic day-to-day stuff that at that point he felt like he had his place, and he was now able to think about, how do I go to church? So
Yeah, a great story. So let's give our panelists a hand. It really just takes one story like that to really keep you going. And so they're all the real deal. Trust me, they're all the real deal. Hey, I want to thank our virtual folks for joining us. And I'd just like to close this in prayer. If you'd like to come up afterwards and ask these folks some questions, I'm sure that they'd be happy to engage with you. But again, we want to thank you all for coming. So let me just pray. Lord, I just want to thank you for everyone in this room, for the people that joined us virtually. We're so thankful that they partner with us here at the Denver Rescue Mission. They allow us the opportunity to continue to see lives change, just like the ones that Deb has been talking about. Lord, in this time of COVID and pandemics and earthquakes and hurricanes and wars ending in Afghanistan, and concerned about refugees from there, this is a tough time, Lord, that we're living in. But we know that you are at the center of it all. Lord, we have said for many years now, many months during this COVID-19, we've reminded each other that God is in control. We know that you've got this. We continue to just seek your will and ask you to help us. Bless my friends that are here today, Lord, that we may continue to have the opportunity to share the gospel of Jesus Christ with people and see lives changed. Lord, we ask all these things in the mighty name of Jesus, and all God's people said, amen. Thank you again for coming.